For as long as multiplayer has existed, we've been sending signals. We communicated through graffiti, through bullet marks, through short voice commands, through taunts, and then, finally, we invented voice chat. There was nowhere left to go. We had reached the peak of communication in games, at least until we learned how to read minds, until it suddenly turned out that voice chat comes with a couple of pretty annoying drawbacks, and it isn't always practical. Shitty microphone, language barrier, parents sleeping in the next room, no way to talk to the enemy team, not wanting to open your mouth in the first place, and honestly, it's just not that fun. We needed something else. Developers understood that and started giving us a whole arsenal of extra communication tools. Pre-recorded character voice lines that could either be selected manually
Enemy tank has been found, over!
or played automatically, depending on the situation.
Smoker!
Marker and ping systems grew into huge communication frameworks for teammates, and eventually learned to understand context too. Pressing the exact same middle mouse button on an item, the environment, or an enemy now produces completely different signals. Loot this, watch out, attack. And finally, gestures became incredibly valuable depending on the game, beyond just the Doomslayer twerking over your corpse. Come here, pull over, wait, look, yes, yes, no, no, and dozens of other weird little convulsions. But even that wasn't enough for players to coordinate on the fly, build complex strategies, or express strong emotions. So players started inventing their own non-verbal language. The first universal signals appeared almost instantly. Nod your camera means yes, shake it side to side means no, jump a couple of times or flick your flashlight on and off means you're asking people to pay attention to you. It even works for spaceships, in case you were wondering. Wiggle side to side with Q and E means you're showing that you're friendly. Rapidly swap between weapons means maybe you're trying to get someone's attention, maybe you're saying hello, or maybe you're just signaling your intentions. I'm friendly. If the game doesn't have pings or pointing gestures, just punch the air in the right direction. If people aren't listening to you, friendly fire usually helps get their attention. If they're really not listening, then friendly exterminators. A serious person must be taken seriously. Still, most of these improvised duct-taped communication tools were actually aimed at the exact opposite, trying to build bridges and make friends. In Minecraft, people used to declare peaceful intentions by block on block with a sword. Worked great until the combat update. In League of Legends, players would spam emotes at the start of the match to propose a non-aggression pact until the minions arrived at the lane. In Brawl Stars, an entire meme was born called Spin to Win. You can't crouch, you can't jump, you don't have a flashlight, so players just started spinning in circles to declare peace. Or to signal someone specific and form a temporary alliance. In Marvel Rivals, Jeff, friendliest shark in existence, could swim into the enemy base and just hop around while harmlessly spitting water at people to goof around with the enemy team. Worked until the rework. Now the water deals damage. Why do they keep taking all the peaceful options away from us? And of course, the Heavy from Team Fortress 2 offered the sandwich of peace. Almost none of these gestures had any practical value. They were just ways to find equally deranged patients in the same asylum. People willing to mess around and blow off steam between intense PvP fights. The actually useful player-created signals in games were often actually way simpler, like silence. In DayZ, the community gradually developed this unspoken rule: if you're silent, you're dangerous. Which makes sense. The stakes are high, the loot is valuable. One bad encounter on the side of the road can wipe out hours of progress. The game has voice chat, meaning you can explain your intentions to a stranger. But if you for some reason stay silent, you're definitely hiding something. Eventually, the game's ecosystem even came up with a slogan: no mic, no life.
No mic, no life, bro.
But there are also more complex signals, the kind that require familiarity with the game. One example from my own experience is Dead by Daylight. The player sign system there is honestly pretty rich. The game has no voice chat, and even text chat only exists in the lobby. So it's either Discord or figure something out yourself. And players absolutely did. Here are two simple but very common examples of gestures. Though first I'll give you a bit of context. The game doesn't just lack chat, it also barely lets you see other players at all. Even teammates. There's no minimap, no teammate icons floating above heads. Survivor outlines only appear in specific situations, and one of those situations is when the killer downs someone. Usually at this situation, the killer immediately picks the survivor up and hooks them to bleed out. But sometimes they leave them on the ground while chasing someone else. And in that situation, the downed survivor, now visible to the entire team, can start rapidly spinning in circles. This has become a non-verbal signal. It's all clear, come pick me up. The second signal is very similar to first one. When a survivor gets hooked, they can attempt to jump off the hook by trying to escape with a small chance of success. But if the survivor repeatedly starts and cancels the escape animation, basically flailing around like a lunatic, that's another signal entirely. Be careful, don't come rescue me, that goddamn killer is camping me. What's interesting is that I personally learned these signals incredibly quickly while playing, and I genuinely can't explain exactly how. I never read chats, never read guides, never checked forums or social media, it just came to me. Probably through watching other players, but I honestly can't remember the exact moment. Then again, language works like that. It's a living thing, it forms itself. And it's not just DBD, where visible player silhouettes become a communication system. Something weirdly similar appeared in Escape from Tarkov, but for completely cursed reasons. See, cheaters using wall hacks can see every player through the fabric of the universe, including each other. And at some point, when two cheaters awkwardly locked eyes through the textures, they started leaning left and right with Q and E to signal one another. It's something like, "Hey brother, I am friendly, don't shoot, would you like some army crackers?" Like, would you imagine multiplayer communication evolving so far that we now apparently have a secret language? The language of fucking loser? And of course, we can't forget the single most legendary signal ever invented in multiplayer games territory. And of course I'm talking about teabag. Just take a moment to appreciate how much this bastard evolved over the years. Back in the day, performing this gesture over the corpse of a defeated enemy meant one thing and one thing only: absolute dominance. For reasons whose origins I don't think are important enough to explain even for historical context. You'll figure it out. But today, teabagging can mean a whole spectrum of different things. A greeting, gratitude, a declaration of peace, generally a surprisingly friendly gesture used to greet people. Someone online once suggested that this is because crouching makes your character visually smaller. You're showing that you aren't a threat. Visually declaring, "I'm just a little guy." But honestly, there's probably a simpler explanation. In some games, teabagging is the closest thing players have to a nod. And nodding is good. Teabagging didn't stop there either, it kept evolving and splitting into subspecies. For example, Marvel Rivals gave birth to a technique the community nicknamed… okay, not community. I literally heard this once, but I liked it. Anyway, I'm talking about the J-bag. It's a technique where, while playing Jeff, you hold down left click and spam the dive button. You know what, I don't understand what exactly I'm trying to teach you kids here. Let's just move on. Another fascinating subspecies is the squid bag, which is basically the exact same thing, except in Splatoon. And if you know any other evolutionary branches of the sacred tea bag, make sure to leave them in the comments. We need education. We're assembling a full tea collection here. But probably the most interesting thing to ever happen to teabagging took place in Dead by Daylight. Because DBD doesn't really give players many ways to communicate, teabagging there evolved into an absurdly multi-purpose language. When meeting another survivor, it means hello. When standing near another survivor, repairing a generator or cleansing a totem, it means mind letting me do this? In case if somebody have a daily challenge. When meeting another survivor while injured, that means heal me. While being healed, it means simple thank you. When done in front of the killer, it means haha, loser. When done in the killer's face while standing in the open exit gate, that's psychological warfare and should probably be banned by the Geneva Convention. Teabagging in DBD also led to a bizarre little tradition called boop the snoot. Because unlike survivors, only two killers can really teabag. Ghostface, who hides around corners, and Pig, who crouches through bushes. At some point, pig players realized this is the perfect opportunity and started crouching near Survivor, inviting them to boop the snoot. Obviously, the gesture itself is completely symbolic, but high-level players turned it into blackmail. Boop it or die.
You need to boop the snoot, motherfucker. Boop it, or you die. Boop it. Alright, you can go then. Alright, he knows the rules.
And just like that, teabagging suddenly experienced a renaissance, evolving into a gesture capable of replacing practically the entire communication system of a game. But sometimes communication becomes difficult, not because there's no voice chat, not because the ping system sucks, not because there aren't enough gestures, but simply because of the nature of the game itself. For example, it's a game about a vehicle. I once read a brilliant quote online: when we get into a car, we transform into a large, stupid animal with a human-sized brain proportional to the size of its new body. And honestly, those of you who drive probably understand that this isn't too far from the truth. The road operates on primitive rules, and the language of drivers, limited by the capabilities of the vehicle itself, is primitive too, yet somehow intuitively understood by every other creature in this bizarre ecosystem. Let's take Sea of Thieves, for example. Long before two crews enter proximity chat range, they can already communicate their intentions pretty clearly. For example, through signal flares with near-universal meanings. White means I'm friendly, red means stay away from me. And that doesn't always mean I want war. Sometimes it simply means we're busy, don't get close. We will absolutely kill anyone who gets in our way. Then come the much more direct signals, where intentions are often communicated simply through the movement of the ship itself. I'll admit, I originally didn't want to stretch the definition of signal language too far, because at some point literally every PvP action starts sounding like communication. He crouched, he's signaling that he wants to defend himself. He shot at me, that's a hint he doesn't want to be friends. He killed me. Fascinating. I wonder what he meant by that. But with vehicles, a lot of behavior genuinely does become language, simply because other forms of communication are so limited. So with ships it's actually pretty simple. If a vessel approaches you head-on or from behind while aiming its cannons upward, it's probably a friendly visit. If it approaches from the side with cannons aimed directly at you, all hands on deck. Things are about to get ugly. Something similar happens with spaceships. In many space sims, if one ship flies past another at high speed, it's often understood as an invitation to a duel. And if you want to extend an olive branch, as I mentioned earlier, you can either flash your spaceship headlights or tap in Q and E, just like in DayZ. Except in space sims, instead of wiggling your body around, you're politely shaking your little wings. A beautiful little dance of friendship. And regular cars gave birth to even more unique signals. Let's talk about Gran Turismo. If the driver in front wants to cooperate with you, they'll start sending signals. For example, they might use their turn signal to show which side they're moving toward while giving you space to pass. Or use that same turn signal to indicate which direction you should go. If they're willing to work together but not willing to give a position, they might flash their hazard lights instead. That's your cue to start closing the distance through slipstreaming, bump drafting their rear bumper to help them gain speed. And then they'll flash their hazards again to say thanks. Headlight flashing from the car behind you usually means I'm not trying to attack you. If you accidentally hit someone's car, flashing your headlights means I'm sorry. But if someone else hit your car, especially hard enough to shove you off your line, then flashing your headlights back means something closer to hello, what the fuck is wrong with you, you piece of shit? And the more flashing there is, the stronger the emotion. At this point, you might start noticing that something strange has happened to gaming language. In hazard lights, meaning both let's work together and thank you. Or in teabagging, meaning both hi and I'm going to shove my balls down your throat. Okay, guess we did need the historical context after all. Basically, gaming language started imitating real language. It developed homonyms, identical words with completely different meanings, like sick and sick. But since video games are fundamentally built around competition, tension and rivalry, the second meaning almost always drifted toward one single thing: humiliation. which honestly makes sense, especially when games from the 90s used to throw stuff like this at you.
Die, bitch!
You no-skill idiot.
And modern games, meanwhile, are hyper-focused on player comfort and try to eliminate even the slightest trace of toxicity.
Watch your language.
But players will always find dirt anywhere, and they did. For example, flashlight clicking a killer in the face at the exit gate is very obviously mockery. Look at me, buddy, you lost. In Rocket League, quick chat phrases like "nice shot" or "what a save" rapidly evolved into the exact opposite of their original intent. Because honestly, where the hell are you aiming, man? Oh wow, look at him, what a nice shot. And in Bloodborne, the Hunter's Mark, which the protagonist presses against their face to absorb its power, was, for fairly obvious reasons, unanimously interpreted by the community as a facepalm. But in League of Legends, this semantic drift became absolutely tectonic. And with all due respect, I have a question to League players. Are you people completely fucking insane? Don't get me wrong, I am genuinely fascinated by this almost supernatural ability to corrupt literally everything within reach. There used to be a pin called Push Lane, marked with a crossed-out minion icon. Players started spamming it on teammates they disliked because somehow they collectively decided the icon looked like a guillotine. It's not completely insane choice, to be fair. It's a forced choice. You see, the community originally had another toxic pin, bait the enemy, but the community looked at it and collectively saw a freaking noose. So players started using it to tell teammates, "Bro, you suck, maybe it's time to end it all." And the pin became so aggressively toxic that Riot eventually removed it from the game entirely. But the most dangerous, most aggressive, most toxic ping of them all turned out to be this one. Originally, this question simply meant the enemy is missing from lane, hence the question mark, where it is. Then players started spamming it on teammates who did something insane, like getting a pentakill, or other similar good things. So the meaning shifted into completely another question, like "Bro, what are you doing?" But eventually it evolved again. Now it gets spammed on players who make mistakes. And the implied question transformed into something more like "Bro, what the f are you doing?" And needless to say, that meaning eventually became the dominant one, to the point where this harmless little question mark is now used primarily as an insult. Creative? Absolutely. Completely deranged? Also absolutely. But if there's one community built entirely on collective imagination, it's definitely the Souls community, which makes perfect sense, because that was kind of the original vision in the first place. Years ago, Hidetaka Miyazaki got stuck in a snowstorm while driving. Several strangers nearby silently pulled up, pushed his car out of the snow and then quietly drove away without saying a single word. That experience inspired the idea of silence multiplayer with invasion mechanic, and eventually an entire non-verbal communication system. In the Souls games, players can leave messages for one another on the ground. But instead of typing freely, they have to build short sentences out of pre-written words like enemy, trap, treasure chest, and so on. By combining them, players created vague instruction like chest ahead, therefore beware of ambush, or secret ahead behind wall, you get the idea. Other players could then discover these messages, rate them positively or negatively, and communicate with each other without voice chat, without text chat, and without even needing to meet another player face to face. At first, the community mostly helped each other, warning players about dangers, pointing towards secrets. Then they came with trolling. Players started leaving deliberately misleading messages leading straight into traps. And eventually the oldest force in human history awakened, the desire to be funny. So players began squeezing every possible joke out of the system. Like writing fatty in front of a narrow passage your character obviously can't fit through. Or weakness, right leg, left leg in front of an NPC in a wheelchair. Or boulder ahead, when there is in fact a boulder ahead. Or snake in front of an absurdly tall ladder. One of the most popular, you could even call it one of the most iconic messages, was placed in front of a certain door. Amazing chest ahead. And only after entering the room and meeting Princess Guinevere in revealing clothing did players realize that chest did not, in fact, refer to a treasure chest. And that's where From Software games really stand apart from everything else. In all the previous examples, players invented communication systems out of random gestures and improvised mechanics. But in Souls games, communication itself is an actual mechanic. Hideo Kojima partially tried to recreate something similar in Death Stranding. But there, communication mostly boiled down to very straightforward emojis. And because of that, players never really managed to build weird, creative, subverting messages around them. Honestly, I don't think I've ever even seen anyone discuss Death Stranding's emojis at all. On the other hand, there's an entire category of games where communication isn't just one mechanic among many. It is the main mechanic. And yes, I'm talking about Journey. The developers originally envisioned it as a wordless adventure where players would wander through an open world, randomly encounter strangers, and communicate using only two direct signals: yes and no. But eventually they realized that a calm, meditative journey didn't really have room for the word no. This was supposed to be a world of exploration, possibility, and constant yes. So the signals were changed into short chirp and long chirp. Players themselves eventually interpreted these sounds as hello/thank you and attention/help me, and rapidly spinning in circles naturally evolved into the universal signal for chaotic goofiness. Later, the studio expanded this idea in Sky Children of the Light, where nearly all interaction happened through unlockable emotions and gestures. Players guided each other toward hidden places, solved puzzles together, and built friendships entirely without words. Words only appeared when you discovered a bench and lit a candle. As long as the candle burned, text chat became available. You could even form friendships by gifting candles to other players, and those friendships had their own progression tree. First you learned to hold hands, then high-five, then chat, and so on. An optional but strangely intimate bond formed between you and a complete stranger inside the game. And there were also games like Meadow and the Endless Forest, which were more like interactive performances. You barely did anything there besides wandering through forests and communicating with other animals through animal gestures and sounds. There weren't real objectives, there was only experience. So honestly, about half of these games are basically immersive theater. The other half are about real communication in strange new world. But within the context of this 40-minute journey we're on together, they interest me slightly less. Because in these games, the communication tools are specifically designed for dialogue. The entire experience revolves around teaching you how to use them, and the game provides every tool you could possibly need. What's far more interesting to me is when players build communication systems and entire communities themselves, squeezing every possible meaning out of mechanics that were never fully intended for it. When game and language evolve into ethics, watch closely. Rocket League. Over the course of Rocket League's lifespan, the community very quickly developed an unspoken rule. If you accidentally lock bumpers with another player, both of you are now morally obligated to keep pushing against each other until someone else scores a goal. Do not ask why, nobody truly knows. This is literally known as rule number 1 within the community. Even people who have never heard of it instinctively follow it, and anyone who breaks the sacred bumper lock is immediately judged by everyone on the field and declared unworthy of competition. Battlefield. An incredible example of etiquette being shaped almost entirely by memes. For years, Battlefield players kept making viral videos with the exact same scenario. A player sees a tank, the tank sees the player, both gently wiggle, then peacefully continue on their separate ways. The videos exploded in popularity, spread through the fanbase, and eventually evolved into an actual code of honor. If you're driving a tank and spot a defenseless infantry player, you politely exchange little camera movements and leave each other alone. And the funniest part is, this behavior eventually spread into entirely different military games too. Dead by Daylight, DBD developed another fascinating form of etiquette. If a killer repeatedly smacks the same object near a survivor, or if a survivor waves at the killer or drops an item like an offering, that's often understood as a silent invitation to farm points together. Instead of killing each other, both players peacefully complete objectives and grind progression points. This happened especially often when only one survivor remained alive after everyone else either escaped or died. At that point, one of the two players has already technically lost anyway, so why not cooperate a little and help each other out? Some people, believe it or not, launch video games because they actually want to play them instead of farming numbers. But if you reject the peace treaty, be prepared for a lengthy post-game lecture about unsportsmanlike behavior. Ethics, after all, are more of an art form than an exact science. The finals. The finals developed a very similar phenomenon. If one team suddenly ends up with only one or two players left, especially in ranked, where missing teammates can't simply reconnect, those poor souls often start desperately spamming emotes at another team, trying to negotiate an alliance. Sometimes the other team initiates it themselves through gestures. Or even all three teams collectively decide to stop fighting entirely and just dance together until the timer runs out. Something similar happens in Overwatch and Marvel Rivals too, but those games at least let you communicate through text chat, when the finals don't. Arc Raiders. Here, etiquette became embedded directly into the game's core design. Play nicely and you stay matched with other friendly players. Act like an asshole and the game throws you into PvP lobby. But the community went even further and created its own punishment system. Players built a website called Speranza Bounties, where users could literally place bounties on toxic players. You could submit someone's ID and describe up to 3 cases of unsportsmanlike behavior, essentially putting a hit contract on dishonest raiders. Now, technically this isn't purely about non-verbal communication, but it kind of is too, because a player who used voice chat, gestures or friendly signals to gain trust before betraying someone is effectively painting a target on their own back.
Ah, you got a mic?
No.
Well, you stay away from me.
Wanna team up?
If you ain't got a mic, it's gonna be hard to communicate with you, dude. Oh, I'm gonna open this.
Oh, similar culture once formed in DayZ. There, self-proclaimed bandit hunters organized through chats, forums and social media to track down players known for betraying or robbing others through deception, and then hunt them down in the name of justice. Gran Turismo developed its own version of this as well. A driver who behaves dishonestly signals intentions to cooperate, but then makes an aggressive maneuver or even tries to push an opponent off the track, unofficially becomes a persona non grata afterward. And because the sim racing community is relatively small, players often don't even need to communicate directly anymore. If you race dirty, you're already sending everyone a very loud message. Nobody should ever trust you. Overwatch. For a while, Overwatch had its own cute ritual. If one team lost a player in ranked because someone rage quit, another player would simply type Torb versus Torb, and suddenly both teams would sit in a circle watching two Torbjorns beat each other to death with tiny hammers. The winner would complete the objective. Their team would take the victory. A sort of sporting self-regulation. Again, technically this wasn't non-verbal communication, players did use chat, but eventually the phrase Torb versus Torb stopped functioning as actual language. It became a signal, and both teams instantly understood exactly what ritual was about to begin, and they answered the call. Moving on to duel etiquette, CS, Valorant, Apex, PUBG. All of them inherited the good old tradition, where near the end of a match, both opponents, or sometimes entire teams, throw away all their firearms to challenge each other to a duel. With knives, with fists, with frying pans. But the single greatest achievement of non-verbal communication in the field of duels has to be the Dark Souls 3 Fight Club. For those unfamiliar, this was a spontaneously formed movement of players who would randomly summon each other into a specific location and begin hosting organized one-on-one PvP duels until only one remained. The game has absolutely no chat system, so how did players even gather together, agree on rules and explain everything to each other? Through gestures. When you get summoned into the right location, players greet you with welcoming emotes. Then two fighters step into the center of the arena, while everyone else uses the sit-down gesture to indicate who's currently participating and who's spectating. Readiness to begin the duel is usually signaled through a respectful bow. If somebody drinks Estos during the duel, the spectators collectively point at the ground to signal an etiquette violation, because in the Fight Club healing is forbidden. Let's not stretch a single duel into the runtime of a Scorsese movie. And eventually, if someone ignores all the rules and starts attacking random participants outside the duel, the entire arena instantly turns on them. Without saying a word, everyone collectively rushes the offender and banishes them back to their own world. In a game where direct communication is practically impossible. So language breaks through every barrier, international ones, team-based, even ethical ones. Because even in games where developers intentionally remove the ability to communicate, people still invent 1,000 different ways to bypass the restrictions and gaslight each other. And actually, there's one more incredibly funny story connected to this idea. And it happened, bizarrely enough, inside a Disney MMORPG. Back in 1996, Disney started exploring the possibility of expanding into online multiplayer games. To coincide with the release of Hercules, they planned a multiplayer game called Herc World, where children could run around, jump, build structures out of blocks and columns and communicate with each other. That last part immediately became a problem. How do you create communication in a children's online game during an era of absolutely terrible chat filters? How do you protect kids from violence, sexual content, or just plain bullying from other children? This is Disney after all. And the company quickly arrived at the most Disney solution imaginable. You don't. They removed chat entirely. But the developers got creative. They came up with a brilliant idea: a sentence construction chat system. Kids would communicate by assembling short phrases out of a small list of pre-approved safe words. And that's how kids would communicate with each other. The idea was just brilliant, or at least it seemed brilliant right up until they sat down their very first 14-year-old playtester. And the first thing he immediately typed was,
"I want to stick my long-necked giraffe up your fluffy white bunny."
That kid played Dark Souls almost 15 years before Dark Souls even existed. Amazing chest ahead. Anyway, Herc World ended up shipping without any kind of chat whatsoever, which immediately created another problem. What exactly are children supposed to do in a multiplayer game where interaction is practically impossible? How are they supposed to cooperate? Help each other complete objectives? Solve puzzles together? Build structures out of blocks? Build what? I'm sorry? Oh, you mean build a little car, Christmas tree, a letter H, a letter I, a letter T, a letter... Disney cancelled Herc World. Eventually, in 2003, communication finally arrived in a Disney MMO through Toontown Online. Players could either choose from complete pre-written phrases or construct contextual ones. Something like "I like", followed by selectable endings, your name, your species, your shirt, and so on. A tightly controlled, perfectly safe communication system. At the same time, the game did technically contain a normal text chat system and private messaging, but access to it was restricted through personal player codes. Every player had a unique code visible in their menu, which could even be printed out physically, meaning nobody in the game could privately message you unless you had personally shared your code with them in real life. The idea was that children would exchange codes safely on playgrounds with parental permission, making it impossible for random strangers to contact them through the game. Problem solved. Shortly after launch, Disney released a housing update. Players could decorate their homes with furniture and invite friends over to show off their cool new interiors. And it took an unbelievably short amount of time before players realized they could arrange furniture into letters and numbers. So children immediately started building their personal friend codes out of furniture inside their houses, giving strangers access to unrestricted private messaging, with no needing permissions. That's right, children hacked text chat itself. That's the deal. This is yet another lesson that teaches us a simple idea. Language destroys every barrier placed in front of it, one way or another. So remember, even if every official communication channel gets shut down, people will always find a way to stay in touch.